Hey folks, Doug Blake with Body Design University. In this video, I want to bring you into chapter 7 and have a look at table 7.1. This is the anatomic location, definitions and examples. Just want to kind of review this so you're not confused by the terminology, especially when you see it on a test question. So it is a 3-column table, anatomic location. So there's your terminology, by the way. Make sure that you're writing it and rewriting it. In this case, a table like this, it's a good idea just to write the word medial closer to the midline of the body. Make sure you write that down to help with your memorization. They're going to give you some examples. I'm not sure how good the examples are. I'll try to give you some more as we're going through it, but generally they're going to come in pairs. So medial and lateral, right? They're opposite. Medial means closer to the midline of the body. Lateral means further away from the midline of the body. So this imaginary line that goes through the midline, right midline of my body, separates my body in the left and right half or whatever. Okay, so medial and lateral. Sometimes you'll hear the terms internal and external. So we could say medial rotation, lateral rotation. In this case, we're trying to discuss positions. So standing straight, not doing anything. A good question would be like, take your clavicle, for example. Like, so that's the bone that starts here at the sternum, right? This is your sternum. So you have a bone, clavicle, you can feel it, obviously, that starts from here, goes out over here, and connects to the acromion, right, in the shoulder joint. So you can see, obviously, this part is closer to the midline. It's literally right on the midline than this part over here on the same bone. So you could say technically that the clavicle has a medial component to it and a lateral component, right? The lateral aspect of the, if I asked you, what joint would represent the lateral aspect of the clavicle? You would say, well, lateral is further away from here. So that's the AC joint. So the acromioclavicular joint, right? Clavicle, clavicular joint. What part of the clavicle or what joint represents the medial aspect of the clavicle? Well, you'd go medial, closer to the midline of the body. That would be the sternoclavicular joint. Okay. You could also, I guess you could use what they use, which is the thigh, the leg. So on the inner, like the inner thigh, right, versus the outer part of the thigh, right? So the femur bone, let's just say. You can talk about insertion points, right? So the reason a muscle does what it does is because it starts in one area and then inserts in another part of the body on another bone. So a great example would be the pectoralis major. So the origin of the pectoralis major is the sternum, right? So it's a very broad, flat tendon, right? And then it converges, because it's a convergent muscle, converges into a small, well, relatively small tendon, right? On the, listen, the medial aspect of the humerus. And that's going to be this part of the humerus that's closer to the body, not the lateral aspect. That's where the deltoid inserts. Get the idea? So because the pectoralis major inserts into the medial aspect of the humerus, meaning closer to the midline of the body, it's going to pull the arm forward, or it's going to adduct, right? But what muscle, well, I think I already told you, what muscle inserts into the lateral or the outside part of the humerus? Well, it's deltoid, and the deltoid does what? It abducts. So it's the exact opposite movement. So because of the positioning of the tendon insertion, you can tell a lot about the kinesiological function of a muscle. So medial and lateral are just opposite. Relatively closer to the midline of the body, relatively further away from the midline of the body. Now, medial part of the humerus is only like the humerus is what, like that thick. So, but it's on the medial aspect. Hope that makes sense. You can say the same thing about the leg. You can say anything about any part of the body, location wise. If it's medial, it's relatively closer to the midline of the body. lateral, relatively further away from the midline or toward the outside of the body. There are your examples. The ears are positioned laterally on the head. Okay, yeah, sure. Whereas I guess if you look inside your head, you know, the part of your brain is medial to, I don't know, but your ears, right? I guess that's a good example. Your deltoids are lateral, right? Laterally positioned on the shoulders versus the, I don't know, name a muscle in this area, right? Your sternocleidomastoid, mastoid, I guess, if you wanted to say that, but you get the idea. Deltoids out here, other muscles right here, closer in. So these would be medial, right? So the sternocleidomastoid, you know, some of the muscles located in the neck, you could say. The point is that medial closer in, lateral further out, or on the outside of the body. The next sort of paired grouping is what's known as contra and ipsa. Contralateral, ipsilateral. Contralateral would be on opposite sides of the body. Ipsilateral on the same side of the body. So all you got to do is kind of think of, you know, if you ever do like we call them contralateral supermen. When you're on the ground, right, or you're lying on the ground, hands are out in front, and you do contralateral, which means I lift my left arm up and out and my right leg back, opposite sides of the body. Left arm, right leg. Versus ipsilateral movements, where perhaps I can't even think of a movement that you would generally do that would make any sense, but lifting the left leg and the left arm simultaneously. I guess you could say, let's see what they're, the right foot is ipsilateral to the right hand, right? It's on the same side. The right foot is contralateral to the left hand. That's kind of the idea as we look at contra and ipsilateral positionally to give us an idea of the way muscles can function. Think about this for a second. I'll give you another example would be your obliques. Now, you know, you have obliques, but you have two terms for the obliques. One are the internal obliques and one are the external obliques. What do? Well, ironically enough, the internal oblique on the left side of your body, works in conjunction with the right external oblique, right? The contralateral muscle, right? Left side internal, right side external. And when they both contract simultaneously, because their movements are the exact opposite, basically, they work in conjunction with each other. So in a sense, the ipsilateral internal oblique and the or I guess you could say the internal and external oblique that are ipsilateral, same size, they work against each other. So the external obliques, because they pull one side to the other, work in conjunction with the contralateral internal oblique. Hope that makes sense. Your external obliques work in conjunction with the contralateral internal obliques to produce a simultaneous movement. It's one of the more interesting, in my opinion, one of the more interesting kinesiological functions or muscular functions in the body are the internal and external obliques. So that's contralateral, ipsilateral again, same side of the body. Okay. The next sort of opposite pairings are going to be anterior positioned on or toward the front of the body, posterior positioned on the obviously the back. So the quadriceps are located on the anterior aspect of the thigh, on the front. Hamstrings are located on the posterior part of the femur or the thigh. Get it? Abdominals, right? All of the anterior muscles, rectus abdominis, pectoralis major. Get the idea? Anterior tibialis, posterior tibialis, and that's where these terms come from. Anterior tilting towards the front of the body. Another great example of that is the pelvis. So the LPHC, lumbopelvic hip complex, can rotate forward and backward, right? Around the hip joint. right? So the femur, right? And so the pelvis can rotate around the hip joint itself. So anterior pelvic tilting would be what? When the pelvis goes forward, right, towards the front of the body. Now, you're going to need some additional terms to let you know it's the superior aspect that we're looking at. So anterior, posterior, proximal, distal. Easiest way to remember this is distal distance. Proximal is closer to the midline of the body. Distal is more or further away, distant from the body. So that's how I always remember proximal, distal, like during kinetic chain movements. So position farthest from the center of the body or other identified reference points. So let me explain that to you. So proximal is positioned nearest to the midline of the body. And so generally we use terminologies proximal, distal when we're talking about kinetic chains, right? So the wrist is more distal, further away from the midline of the body than the elbow. So the wrist is distal to the elbow. Make sense? The elbow is distal to the shoulder. Okay. The wrist is proximal, right? More proximal than the joints in the fingers. Does that make sense? It's because the wrist is closer to the midline of the body or a reference point, right? Than the fingers, right? So you get the idea. So the elbow is proximal or more proximal to the midline of the body when we're talking about in reference to the wrist. Proximal, right, to the wrist. Distal to the shoulder. Further away, closer, right? Pretty straightforward. The last two are going to be inferior, superior. This means on top of or below. Inferior means below a structure of the body. Superior means above or on top of. These are important terms when we talk about the pelvis. So the suprailiac is the superior aspect of the pelvis. Why? Because it's on top. So and that's why when we talk about pelvic movement, posterior and anterior pelvic tilt, it's in reference. The reference point is the top or the superior aspect of the iliac crest. Hope that makes sense. So it's same thing with the scapula. If you look at your scapula, these are flat bones. They can rotate, right? Well, the part of the scapula that is superior is the part that's on top. The inferior aspect of the scapula is at the bottom. So when the scapula, right, the superior and inferior aspects rotate and move, we can say that they are either laterally rotated or medially rotated, externally rotated, internally rotated. And so these are important terms. The point here is to understand that inferior means sort of underneath. So and again, the key areas of the body that we look at are going to be the pelvis when inferior superior, pelvis and the scapula. I mean, yes, the shoulders are superior with respect to the belly button, right? Because it's on top, right? Over and above versus the, for instance, the hamstrings insert into what's known as the ischial tuberosity, right? Of the pelvis. Well, the ischial tuberosity of the pelvis is where? Is it superior or inferior? It's going to be inferior. It's underneath. So when you look at the ischial tuberosity, where the hamstring muscles insert into, because it's underneath, it's inferior to on the pelvis itself. Because of that location, when they pull the pelvis down, right? And they rotate the pelvis posteriorly, right? Because the ischial tuberosity of the pelvis under normal positional conditions is up slightly, right? There it's up slightly. So there is a slight anterior tilt to the pelvis under normal postural conditions. Well, the hamstrings, when they contract, they pull it down. So it'll pull posteriorly. Hope that makes sense. So go through your terms, obviously, know the anatomic location, and kind of look through when you're doing an exercise, for instance, and get a better appreciation and understanding of how these terms can be used even during exercises. Now, again, I know that the table is speaking to specifically a static position. Generally, it's a static position, but it's also helpful to understand how when the body moves, how these terms can be used. So I hope this was helpful. Remember to subscribe to the channel. Give us a thumbs up. If it was helpful, you understand it, then write the word understand in the comment section. If you want full access to the NASM exam study materials that we do provide at Body Design University, go ahead and click on the link in the description box below. Remember, every Wednesday night, we do a Quizlet live exam study, 30 minutes, 6 to 6:30 Eastern Standard Time, to help you to learn and memorize the terms in the NASM textbook. So have a great week, and we will see you next week.